Imagine you just moved to a lovely little beach town where there's always something fun to do or someone new to meet, sunbathing all day and partying all night. Then one holiday weekend, the fun comes to an end in the most unexpected and horrible way. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kimbyrleigha. If you've never been here before, nice to finally meet you. Now let's get into the case for today. I have yet another Florida case. One, because some of the worst cases come out of Florida, and two, I grew up there, so I often relate to these cases, especially this one, because it happened in Jacksonville. That's where I lived, and this was right down the street from where I lived on Jacksonville Beach. My daughter was actually born in Jacksonville Beach, so I'm very eager to tell you the story, and it really affected me. I'd like to introduce you to Corey Parker. She was born and grew up in Rochester, New York, on August 15th, 1973, to her father Bruce and her mother Liz. Corey was a talkative little girl, and that did not change as she got older. Her mother would tell people that she could talk to anyone. It didn't matter if they were 2 months old or 80 years old. Corey would find a way to connect. Corey attended Brighton High School in upstate New York, where she ended up graduating in 1991. Then she went to the State University College at Buffalo for 2 years, followed by the University of Buffalo for several months before she decided to move to Daytona Beach, Florida, around 1994. The beaches and the sun and the fun, it was perfect for Corey. She preferred the beach life over the cold winters back in Rochester. After living in Daytona for a few years, Corey decided to move just an hour or so away to sunny Jacksonville, Florida, and she began to attend Jacksonville Community College. She was taking her required classes because she wanted to focus on a major, but she wasn't quite sure what she wanted yet. Something I noticed right away when I was locating pictures of Corey is that she was beautiful, gorgeous. However, she was the type of person that really didn't know they were beautiful. And I've heard that before, but genuinely, she was sort of unaware how attractive she was. She was a cheerleader growing up. She was a member of the debate team, the ski club. She was involved in a lot of extracurricular activities. She was always busy, and that suited her personality. Extremely extroverted. Not much changed by the time she reached her 20s and was living in Jacksonville. Daytona was fun, but Corey wanted to move somewhere where she could attend a college in a beach town, in Jacksonville. That was her new home. You can probably tell by everything I just told you, she absolutely loved the beach. I like looking at it, honestly, but I don't really like going in the sand and whatnot, but it's absolutely gorgeous. And I also live on the beach, and I always have, so I can relate to that party life, the beach life, the tailgating, Jacksonville and the football games and the fun. And she was having a lot of fun. She was just enjoying her independence. In September 1998, Corey moved into a new little 2-bedroom apartment only 4 blocks from the beach. It was in a quad building. I'm going to show it to you right here on Jacksonville Beach. And like I said, this was right down the street from where I lived. This is where I used to live, right here. So I'm very familiar with this exact neighborhood. Here is a picture of it on Google Maps, and I just want to show you down the streets, how close it is to the beach, to the other homes, to other apartments. And this is kind of what you could call a close-knit neighborhood. But at the same time, I'm just going to say, there are a lot of transient people that come through here at all hours of the night. Jacksonville is a very lively place to live. There's something going on all the time. And as a matter of fact, Corey even worked at a bar. So she was always surrounded by new people, strangers, if you will. The bar was called Ragtime Tavern. And if you're from Jacksonville Beach, let me know in the comments. I know you're going to know all about Ragtime. It's right on Atlantic Beach, close to the boardwalk on the Strip. And this area attracted a lot of people who like to eat and party and have fun, especially because there are several colleges in Jacksonville. The beaches in Jacksonville work like this: Atlantic Beach, then going south you have Neptune Beach, and then Jacksonville Beach. Ragtime Tavern is a seafood and grill in Atlantic Beach. It's been there for over 25 years. They have handcrafted beers, a very lively environment in this small neighborhood. So it definitely attracts the locals. And I remember spending time there, and I recall the music being really good. I think they had like some live bands and whatnot. Corey worked as a waitress during the day, and then anytime she had a day off, she loved to go spend time on the beach with her friends. And remember I told you that Corey loved to talk? Well, being a waitress was perfect for her. She absolutely loved it. She was super friendly. She liked to engage all types of people in conversation, and it was easy since she was super pleasant, and it helped that she was pretty. She was 5'11", beautiful big hazel eyes, and a bright smile. I'm going to put a picture of her up on the screen. When she walked into a room, all eyes would be on her. She just attracted people like a magnet. And many times they would actually think she was a model, and they would often ask her, "Do you model?" She was very humble, but her friends would say that she could definitely be a model. As much as she was a people person, she was also very independent. She was very close to her family, but she really enjoyed being on her own. Her mother and father ended up getting divorced by this time, and her father had remarried to Corey's stepmother, Loretta. Corey also had a sister named Kimbyrleigha. They all supported Corey on her move to Florida. So back to September 1998. She was just getting settled in. She had a fun job, and she had new friends and fun, and her big smile and her bubbly personality. People were just drawn to her, so she was making new friends very quickly, and it seemed like she always had a guy around that was trying to get her attention and, of course, date her. Corey was one of those people that would always walk around saying that she did not have enough time in the day to do everything she wanted to do. Her normal routine consisted of going to classes, then waitressing at ragtime, and since a lot of her friends were also waitressing and bartending around town, they would end up getting off work and then bouncing around from different bars together. They also give the in the biz discounts and perks in Jacksonville, so that's a plus. There were quite a few bars they frequented, the Lemon Bar, of course, Ragtime, and the Ritz, and they would hang out, have drinks, dance, and chill. And speaking of friends, I would like to introduce you to one of Corey's friends. Now, even though she hadn't been there long, like I said, she already found a way to make some really good quality friends, one of which was her neighbor, Ashley. She lived with her mother at the time, right next door to Corey, and Ashley was only 18. Corey was 25. But since Corey was really friendly, she never wanted to leave anyone out. She was going to the beach one day with her other friends, and she saw Ashley standing outside. She went right up to her and she said, "Do you want to come?" And Ashley said, "Of course." So they went to the beach and they became friends. Ashley really looked up to Corey like a big sister. She didn't have a sister, so that was really special to her. However, she did have a brother, an older brother named Joe. Joe didn't live there, but he did come and visit every now and again. He was in the military, and he wasn't a permanent fixture in Jacksonville Beach, but like many other guys, when he laid his eyes on Corey, it was like no one else was there. The world became black and white, and Corey was the only one in color. When they were introduced to each other, Joe could not help but flirt with Corey, and that's to be expected if you know Corey. This was a common theme when anyone came to hang out around her. However, she was afraid to hurt people's feelings, so she didn't exactly flirt with everyone, but it can come off that way because she was so friendly. She would go out of her way to make sure she wasn't hurting anyone's feelings or rejecting them or letting them down. She wasn't the type of person that would say no easily. She wanted everyone to feel included. That could have actually been one of her downfalls. Even though she loved to socialize and be around friends all the time, one thing she was really proud of at this point in her life was that she was able to afford this apartment where she didn't have to have a roommate. However, she always had people over almost every day. Friends would come over, they would hang out, they would have pizza and drinks, and she was known to have these little get-togethers whenever anyone was off work or as an after party when they all left the bars. Plus, since it was only a few blocks from the beach, it was the regular gathering spot before heading out to the beaches together. The people in her building were great. I already mentioned Ashley. Then there was a family that lived on the other side of her, and she just felt like she got really lucky with her location. Another one of her friends I wanted to introduce you to is Amy. She was probably one of Corey's closest friends in Jacksonville, and you're going to find out what kind of person Corey was if I haven't painted a thorough picture of her yet. I try to do my best, but she ends up meeting Amy at a pizza place. They're in line, waiting for the bathroom, and somehow Corey just struck up a conversation with Amy. They had both seen each other around several times, and Corey just said, "Hey, I've seen you around. We should hang out sometime." And Amy said, "Yeah, we should." Once they started hanging out, they kind of considered each other their partners in crime. And a little innocent fun never hurt anyone, right? Because the girls were having fun. And yes, they did get in a little trouble here and there, but it was to be expected. I'm sure you know, when you're in your 20s, you're in college, it can be a lot of fun. And Corey was a free spirit. She didn't really have that one direction in life, but she was on the right track. Just being who she was, funny, quick-witted, friendly, beautiful. And speaking of which, it wasn't just guys that would get I don't know, let's say infatuated with her. There was a friend of hers named Tiffany, and they would hang out pretty often. Tiffany was slowly getting closer and closer to Corey, or at least that's what she wanted to do. Tiffany considered Corey a close friend, but just how close were they? Because it turns out that Tiffany had a little crush, a little girl crush on Corey. It was nothing serious, but she was a bit infatuated with her. And at this point in Tiffany's life, she was a little bit curious. She definitely dated men, but there was just something about Corey that she was drawn to. So there might have been a little bit more than a friendly vibe when it came to Tiffany, and not on Corey's part, just the infatuation that Tiffany had with Corey. So she would always try to hang out with her, just to be around her, just to be in her presence. And as I explained, Corey was one of those people who didn't want to be mean to anyone. So she gladly welcomed Tiffany's company. But Corey had her eyes on someone else. She and her neighbor Ashley would frequently sit outside in the sun right in front of their apartment talking about everything, talking about school, work, and Corey's new boyfriend. So I'm going to fast forward to the end of October. She's been there for a little over a month, and she met a guy named David who just swept her off of her feet. They had a really strong connection. They thought at first they were just going to be really good friends, but within a week, they were an official couple. She was smitten. Even though it seems impossible, I know, I've been there. Recently, I've been there. She was falling in love. It hadn't been that long, but sometimes you just know. And that's how she felt about David. She wanted to be around David all the time. And luckily for her, he felt the exact same way. So yes, her and Ashley would have their girl talk. They would wait outside for their laundry to be done, and they'd have a little glass of wine and just chit chat. Ashley really knew that David was the one for Corey because Corey just couldn't stop talking about how amazing he was. So what happened? Because it seems like Corey is living her best life. So how does everything turn upside down and become her worst nightmare? It really doesn't make sense at this point. But that's why I need to tell you about something Corey didn't feel good about. Something that was making her feel uneasy. Something that she had told her friends about. She thought that she had caught someone looking into her window. She wasn't sure at first, and with the type of person that she was, she did not want to go around accusing anyone or jumping to conclusions. But in passing, she did let her friends know that she thought she saw someone looking into her apartment window, just creeping around. But no further steps were really taken. She wasn't too concerned, just a little uncomfortable. But then, as she was talking to some of her neighbors, someone else mentioned that they saw someone looking through their windows as well. So now she sort of has this unofficial confirmation that she's not going crazy and that there is someone creeping around. She's definitely keeping her eye out. And not only that, Corey no longer felt comfortable or wanted to hang out in the back of her apartment where the kitchen was. The kitchen window is where she saw someone, like allegedly a peeping Tom. So just in case she wanted to spend time in the other areas of the house, it could be anything. Somebody could have followed her home from the bar. They could be watching her. She wasn't sure, but she didn't want to find out. Instead, whenever she had a girls' night in, or she was with Amy or her other friends and they would rent movies and hang out in the house, they would kind of avoid the kitchen area if they could. I want to jump ahead to November of that same year, 1998. Corey and her group of friends were planning a little Friendsgiving, which they refer to as an orphan's Thanksgiving, but most of them were away from their families, and this could be a way for them to get the feeling of the holidays, even though they were far from their loved ones. Everyone was going to bring a dish, sort of like a potluck dinner, and Corey decided to bake pies, and she was so excited. She thought it would be fun to invite her friends over on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. That's when she was making her desserts to bring to the Friendsgiving feast. Everyone was hanging out. They were drinking beer. They were getting excited for the holiday season. And then when the pies were done, the group had planned to go out for a night on the town. The day before Thanksgiving, in Jacksonville especially, it's a big party day. Everyone has off from school the next day, and this meant they could stay out as long as they wanted to. So this was an opportunity for a lot of people from that area to have pretty big party nights. Corey and her friends were no different. They had been looking forward to this night for a while. Unfortunately, there was one friend that couldn't make it that night, and that was Amy. She really, really wanted to stick around so she could party with her best friend, but she had to travel down to South Beach to go to her mom's because she was celebrating Thanksgiving there the next day. Then Corey got some additional disappointing news. Her boyfriend, David, wasn't going to be able to make it to the Friendsgiving dinner. He let her know that night, and even though Corey was disappointed, she definitely understood that this was a holiday. His family wanted to see him, but he did promise that he would be back before she knew it. It's just sad that they would never get a chance to see each other ever again. The friends planned to meet at the Ritz that night, and I want to go ahead and show you what it looks like up on the screen. This is a very popular hangout. It's a cocktail lounge. It's got that very relaxed vibe, pool tables, and I don't know if you're into this, but the walls are covered in taxidermy animal heads. Some people might call it a little country, but it is a really fun place. Just like the other clubs and the bars that I've been talking about, it's right on Jacksonville Beach, and the friends go out. They have a really fun night together. And there's even a picture taken of Corey enjoying the night with her friends. As the night went on, everyone decided they were pretty much done at 1:30. Corey got a ride home from one of her ragtime coworkers, and that was the last time that anyone saw Corey alive. The very next day, while everyone was enjoying the holiday feasts, Corey was nowhere to be found. And remember how excited she was? She was baking the pies. Everyone knew she had every intention of going to that party with her friends. So when she didn't show up, everyone was pretty disappointed, but then they also figured maybe she had other plans come up. Maybe she went with David to his family's get together. So they really didn't think that much about it, especially because they were so busy. Amy did try calling her on Thanksgiving Day, and she never answered. So she left a message for her and never got a call back. Corey's family expected to get a phone call from her during Thanksgiving dinner. So when she failed to call, they called her but never got an answer. And they just figured she was busy and she would just call them and catch up the very next day. And it wasn't until the next morning on Black Friday that someone finally noticed that Corey was actually missing. She definitely wasn't the type of person to skip out on work or not come in without letting somebody know. That just wasn't within her character. She was always punctual and very responsible. She definitely took her job seriously. So when the ragtime employees were standing around, they were doing their morning opening routine, Corey's manager realized that she was not there. He got worried. So he told one of the cooks, who was also friends with Corey, to go check her residence since it was pretty close by and she wasn't answering her phone. When her coworker showed up, Corey's car was in the driveway and the door to her apartment was locked. He tried several times to knock on the door and he did not get an answer. So he decides to go back to ragtime and tell his manager that she didn't answer the door. When the manager heard this, he wasn't satisfied. He told him, go back and try again. Find out what's going on. He said, bang on the windows, walk around the apartment. They just felt like something wasn't right. And I've said this many times. I think we just have this intuitive sense about us, especially with her being close to them and beautiful and not being from this town and living in this transient area. So the cook went back to check on her once again. And that is when he walked around the apartment. He gets to her bedroom window and he notices that it's actually open. It's like open about 1.5 inches. And it was enough to stick his fingers inside, so he moves the blinds just to peer inside. And that's when he saw her foot. It wasn't just her foot. There was blood on her foot, and it was distinctive. There was no mistaking that he was staring at something very horrific. Instead of calling the police right away, the cook once again goes back to ragtime to now tell his manager what was going on. It was his manager that finally ended up immediately calling the police. At approximately 11 o'clock in the morning, Jacksonville Police Department received a call in reference to a welfare check. Police weren't sure which apartment was hers, so they ended up banging on Ashley's front door. They asked, "Are you Corey Parker?" And she said no. And she didn't know what was going on, but she pointed to the window next to her apartment and she said, "Corey lives right there." Ashley was standing outside wondering what the police would want with Corey. When officers arrived on the scene, they walked around the apartment to see if anything was amiss. They knocked on the door, just like the cook did, and they didn't get an answer. Then one of the police officers noticed that the kitchen window was open. The police end up sending one of their officers through that kitchen window to come to the front door, unlock it, and let them in. And at this point, they start checking around the whole apartment to make sure that everything's okay and to find Corey. And they did find Corey, exactly where the cook had reported, in her bedroom, on the bed. The first thing that the officer noticed was the way that Corey was positioned. She was kind of propped up in the corner where the walls met, on her bed, on the mattress, almost staged. She was completely unclothed and covered in blood. Either she had been propped up or she had scooted backwards to get away from her killer. So if she ended up where she was, she had nowhere else to go. Her legs were spread apart, which indicated that there was some kind of sexual component to this crime. And this was a brutal crime. Just the gruesomeness was shocking. There was blood all over the walls, all over her body. It was almost as though she had been painted red from head to toe. It was so sad. One of the officers said that they will never forget it, and I don't think I will either. It was clear that she had been murdered, and Ashley was standing outside her apartment listening. And she finally got her answer. She heard an officer say that Corey was dead. And Ashley just fell to her knees bawling. It was horrific, especially because they could tell that she fought for her life. She was at her most vulnerable. She was all by herself, sleeping when this happened to her. The position of the body was very sexual in nature. The way that she was killed led police to believe that someone with a lot of rage and a lot of hatred did this to her. Someone that must have known her. But all of her friends loved her, so who could have done this? And the biggest question of all is why? What reason would someone have to hurt someone this badly? She was innocent. There is nothing she could have ever done to deserve anything like this. Nothing. One officer said it had to be the most haunting thing he had ever experienced in his life. Just to think that there was somebody walking around, breathing right then, that did that. That was capable of committing a crime like that. But unfortunately, being kind, it doesn't shield you from becoming a victim of someone with such an evil and deranged mind. If only it was that easy. And it's usually the best of the best who fall victim to these heinous crimes. They're just taken from this world. And officers really think that this is a crime of passion. They also notice that there's no signs of forced entry, but as they look at the kitchen window from the inside, that's when they notice something. Blood. There was a lot of blood at this crime scene. It looked like there was some type of bloody fingerprints or swipes on the windowsill. There wasn't any blood throughout the living room or the other parts of the apartment. Everything was contained within Corey's bedroom and on the windowsill. Detectives were of the opinion that someone either came through this window in the middle of the night, crept into Corey's bedroom, and while she was fast asleep, attacked her without any warning, or they were waiting for her. They knew her schedule. They knew she wasn't home. And then they just crouched there, maybe hid in her closet or under the bed or somewhere in the darkness until they thought she was asleep, and then they came out of their hiding place to commit this brutal act. So what exactly did this monster do to her? He stabbed her. Not once and not twice, but 101 times. 101 times. This case is actually really hard to talk about because I had to see the crime scene. I thought about this when I was reading about this case, and I hate to even put it this way, but this was the only way my brain could comprehend just how much effort and energy and rage had to have gone into this. I pictured working out. When we do repetitions, is it 5 or 10 or 15, 20, 30? Imagine raising your arm and coming down, and not just coming down, but going through something, going through someone and raising it back up and coming down 101 times. Try to do it 30 times, because I cannot fathom how or why anyone could do something like this. And I say that every single time in every single case, but 101 times. There were also 2 deep wounds to her throat, which at first glance they believed was the obvious cause of her death. But of course, they do have to wait for the autopsy report. There is one thing for sure: this was overkill. By the time Corey's body was transported to the coroner's office, detectives had already been on the scene. They had a very long day ahead of them. They wanted to act fast. This perpetrator could be in the area just roaming around the streets, planning to do this to some other unsuspecting woman or person. They had to scour the apartment for clues, and fast. They didn't wait a second. They were combing through that entire home, finding anything of significance that they thought they could use to help point to this killer and who did this. And luckily, they did find things, and one of the most significant things were hairs. Human hairs with the root still attached to one of them, and these hairs were in Corey's hands. They were around the whole area, and at least one of them still had the root intact, so it stands to reason this hair belonged to the killer. They also found a fine hair on a white sock in her bedroom, and the one with the root was found in her panties, and it was definitely not hers. Detectives located Corey's purse and her car keys on the kitchen table. All of these items were collected so that they could be tested at a later point at the FBI laboratory. There was something else that they found: a gold cigarette lighter. Now, Corey did smoke, but all of the other lighters were those little plastic Bic lighters. There were no other lighters that looked like this gold one, and it definitely stood out to investigators, and they thought that it could possibly belong to the assailant. They also took some cuttings from the bedding, as well as the sheets and the comforter. They even collected a bunch of used wine glasses with fingerprints and lip impressions on them. Everything was evidence. Now let's go back to the window. Remember how I said it looked like there were fingerprints or swipe marks on the windowsill? Well, they actually found blood on both sides, on the outside part of the windowsill and on the inside, as well as on the kitchen counter. The fingerprints didn't have ridges in them, so the perpetrator was probably wearing gloves. Now they felt like they had enough solid evidence to believe that the perpetrator came and went through this kitchen window. Reason being, the door would not have given them much of a cover, number one. It had a light above it, so it would have illuminated them as they came and went. And coming out of a door that leads to other apartments wouldn't be the best bet. The kitchen window was not facing that area, so it offered a better getaway for being unseen. After they took as many photographs as possible to preserve the evidence the way it was when they first did their walkthrough, they decide to go canvass the neighborhood. This is a big job. Not only the neighborhood, but they need to talk to all of Corey's friends and her coworkers, because they needed to know all about her life, who she spent the most time with. And they definitely had their eyes on David as a potential suspect. He had just come into her life. Had something happened? She was a free spirit. It could have been taken as being flirtatious, so maybe there was some kind of jealousy between Corey and David going on. We'll get back to that in a minute. First, let's go back to the canvas of the area. Remember I showed you the road that Corey lived on in the fourplex apartment? The road that she lived on had several other apartment buildings that were the same as hers, this fourplex style. Investigators started to interview people that lived in her immediate complex right away to see if anyone heard anything. Then they spread out further and further down her block and elsewhere, going door to door. You can imagine the devastation that unfolded. All of her neighbors knew how sweet and kind she was, and it was shocking that this could happen right next door to them. And they didn't hear anything. They didn't see anything strange. There was one thing that the neighbors did say. They said that they were experiencing a peeping Tom, someone that was looking through their windows in their apartments, and they wanted to know, could this be the person responsible for Corey's death? Now they had to retrace Corey's steps from the day before. They know that the last place she was at the Ritz. When they see the photo from that night, she's with 2 people, one of which is her friend Tiffany. So they take note of anyone who would have seen her last. And as they start questioning friends, they realize that they really want to bring Tiffany in for questioning first. And why is that? Well, before they even let anyone know what happened to Corey, Tiffany was telling people that she was dead, murdered. found in a pool of blood. How did she know that unless she was there? These were details that were not in the media yet, and as a matter of fact, it was before most of her other friends who were closer to her knew that she was dead. This really concerned detectives. They got her in for an interview as soon as possible. Not to mention, her friends told them that there was something odd about Tiffany, that she could possibly have wanted to be with Corey, that she wanted to date Corey, or at least hook up with her. Maybe Corey didn't want that. Maybe she resisted. Tiffany was also bigger in stature. She could definitely overpower Corey, so police want to know everything they can about why Tiffany seems to know so much. Now, Tiffany is cooperative, but she's not happy. She feels like she's being treated like a suspect, but everyone is a suspect until proven otherwise. She just tells detectives that they went to the bar with a few friends, including Corey, on Wednesday night, and she said goodbye around 2 a.m. Then she said she called Corey around 4 o'clock in the morning after showing up at her door, knocking, and getting no answer. According to Tiffany, she had plans to spend the night at Corey's and then go with her to the Friendsgiving the next day. But apparently, she said when she came to the door, no one answered. So she called Corey, and allegedly, Corey answered. But she sounded like she was asleep, so Tiffany left. The story was getting convoluted, and detectives just wanted to get to the bottom of it. So while Tiffany is saying all this, other detectives, of course, are pulling Tiffany's phone records. And that's when they start to find some inconsistencies in her story that just don't make sense. When the detectives started to inquire about her relationship with Corey, her sexuality, they began to kind of paint her as a killer. Tiffany did not appreciate that. She said she just lost one of her closest friends and now she was being treated like a criminal. She told them, "I'm not the killer," but they could not locate that call from Tiffany to Corey on either one of their phone records. Tiffany said she didn't understand why. Maybe there was a glitch. But come on. Does that really happen? You tell me. Maybe it does. Detectives are not too sure. They keep probing her, and finally they ask her about why she knew so much about the crime scene. Did she talk to Corey at 4 a.m. because she was with Corey at 4 a.m. before taking her life? It turns out Tiffany could explain away the reason she knew so much about the crime scene. One of her good friends was an EMT on the scene at that time. They were the ones that relayed all the information to her, and detectives were able to confirm this. However, detectives are still confused about the inconsistencies regarding the phone call and the alleged trip to Corey's house at 4 a.m. Investigators tried to probe by asking, could it have been you were a little drunk? Maybe you called someone else. Maybe someone else picked up the phone. And maybe you did call Corey. Maybe that person let you talk to Corey. Or maybe you just called someone entirely different. I don't know if the phone records showed any of that or not, but wouldn't they be able to tell? Tiffany does refuse to provide a DNA sample. Nevertheless, they decided to pretty much rule Tiffany out for the time being, and the next person of interest, David. The way that David found out about what happened to Corey was devastating. A mutual friend of theirs left a message on his answering machine. All it said was, "David, come into my house. Something happened." That was it. When he went to his friend's house, the friend told him that Corey had been murdered. David didn't know how to feel because this stuff didn't happen to the people in your life. It happens to someone else, somebody else's loved ones, not yours, not your girlfriend. I'm going to cut to the chase. They found out that he wasn't in town, and they confirmed this through plane tickets. He wasn't nearby Jacksonville Beach when this happened. However, they weren't exactly done with David. They wanted him to come by Corey's apartment, to go inside and tell them if anything was missing or out of place. Well, he was not having it. He said, "There's no way that I'm going in there. Just take my DNA, do whatever you want, but I will not go inside." And I don't blame him. This is pretty much the love of his life, his soulmate, someone that he was in love with. So they're not just going to force him to do that. He's entirely cooperative, though, and they have to move on to the other people in Corey's life. David called Amy. She was at her mom's having Thanksgiving holiday festivities that weekend, and when she picked up, David was crying. He said, "Did you hear what's going on?" And Amy was confused. She said, "What? What's going on?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's fine." And he said, "No, Corey. There's something wrong with Corey. Somebody found her in a pool of blood." And Amy was shocked. She just kept saying, no, she's fine. I talked to her the other day. She's fine. But then she heard those words. Corey's dead. And she was hysterically crying. She said that there was just this feeling inside her that's hard to describe. It doesn't seem real. I can understand why murders like this are so shocking. Aside from the obvious reasons, you never see it coming. You don't see the body most times either. So there's no way for you to have closure, no way to try to say goodbye. Because the last time that you saw that person or talked to them, they were alive. They were smiling, they were laughing, they were there. And then the next thing you know, you can never see them again. It doesn't add up in our minds. You can't connect the dots. Amy wants to help right away. She actually reaches out to the Jacksonville Police Department and said, if you can use my help, you have it. So she drives back to Jacksonville from Miami. On December 1st, there was a memorial held not only in Florida, but also back home in Corey's hometown. Her friends and family gathered, and they spoke about how amazing she was. Her mom mentioned that her friends in Florida really needed closure, just as much as her family did, and that Corey had gained, in her words, a zillion friends over the years because of her compassionate and outgoing personality. One of her friends, Bethany Ribble, she mentioned how generous and outgoing she was. She was goofy, and she was so much fun to be around. They were best friends for 15 years, and she said that it was an unbelievable shock. She left behind her father, Bruce, her stepmother, Loretta, her sister, Kim, as well as her mom, Liz. It was so hard for them to stand around and not have any answers about who did this to their loved one, even while they're celebrating the life that she once had. Meanwhile, Corey's autopsy results came back. It was confirmed that she was stabbed 101 times. There were numerous defensive wounds on her hands, on her arms. She was definitely shielding herself the best way she could from the deadly strikes. They did locate a number of hairs in her hands. The medical examiner reported that 54 of the wounds were inflicted after death. Some of the wounds were described as being done in a little picking motion. The ones on her stomach, in particular, like poking at the skin, but not going all the way through. And it was very odd. It was as though the perpetrator was playing with her, and it was disturbing. What was actually surprising was that there were no signs of forced intercourse, no semen present on Corey's body or inside, and when checking the bedding, there was no semen found. This led detectives to believe that Corey was fighting to resist the sexual act, and she was harmed because she wouldn't give in. They still believe it was sexually motivated. The cause of death was bleeding out due to her neck wounds. They did not find a weapon in Corey's home, but believed that it was a small knife around 3 inches in length. Detectives turned their focus to Corey's fellow classmates at the college campus. They want to know whether they knew anyone who might want to hurt her. There was a lot for detectives to go through. This was an area where a lot of people came through that didn't live there. People coming to party in Jacksonville Beach, people wandering up and down the streets, like I mentioned, at odd hours of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning. College students who are actually leaving to go back home after finishing up their semester. It was a lot. They also started to think that Corey could have possibly been killed by a stranger. Nothing was out of the realm of possibility. And meanwhile, a tip comes in, and they want to check it out. Apparently, a coworker of hers from Ragtime was obsessed with her, and those were his words. His name was Eric Ely. Detectives go ahead and head over to Ragtime and start to interview each one of Corey's coworkers. It was true. Everyone said that 27-year-old Eric was infatuated with Corey, always talking to her, continuously. He would not stop. He was persistent, trying to get her to go on a date with him or just to be friends with him, anything to get close to her. I'm going to say this again. Corey's too nice. She doesn't want to reject anyone. She wouldn't flat out say no. She would make excuses about why she couldn't see him or couldn't go out with him, but she wouldn't blatantly tell him, look, I don't like you. I want nothing to do with you. And no, I won't go out with you, because it's pretty harsh. As they dig deeper, they find out that Eric was working at Ragtime as a cook. A lot of Corey's fellow waitressing colleagues thought he was creepy. And not only that, they find out that he had been repeatedly calling Corey leading up to the day of her murder. This guy looks so normal to me. He's like the typical surfer guy. He's got the long blonde hair, the tan, total Florida boy. But that's what's so scary. Corey could have easily been nice to him and let him get close as a friend, not suspecting anything. And get this, he wanted to give her a Thanksgiving dinner, just the two of them. But he didn't outright ask prior to Thanksgiving. Yeah, this was weird. What he did was odd. He made an entire Thanksgiving dinner just hoping that he could call her up, impress her, and that she would come over to eat it with him. So he made it in anticipation of her saying yes. There are varying reports. Some say that he left a message on her answer machine saying, "Hey, it's Eric, from work. I just wanted to invite you to Thanksgiving. I'll cook everything. You just have to show up, okay? I'll expect you around here like 4. And yeah, make sure to wear something nice, comfortable." Now, I couldn't confirm this, but either way, a version of the story is true. He did make the dinner expecting her to come without any plans. They find out about this from Eric himself, because when they bring him in, he's acting very unstable. He didn't have a criminal record, but there were definitely some mental health issues going on with him. He wasn't hiding it either. He admitted that there was something wrong with him, that he was dealing with a lot of problems emotionally and mentally. When they asked him if he was obsessed with Corey, he admitted that he was. Here he is, in his own words from the interview.
Did you ask Corey out for Thanksgiving dinner prior to calling on him?
I may have mentioned it, but I know I didn't ask her a direct question.
It gets worse. And this sickened me. What he starts to admit to detectives is unreal to me. When they pressed him about the thoughts that he had about Corey, listen to what he says. And I'll tell it to you too in case the audio is bad. He basically tells them he wanted to her and he had fantasies about her, like violent ones. And then they ask him, if you would have done this, how would you have done it? This is just crazy. Here's how he answers.
How would you contain her? How would this person feel? Take her down when she was tired. And you just poke her, do whatever, stab her, cut her throat, or...
He describes the scene of the crime almost exactly how they believed it played out, even the wounds to her neck. And he said that he would cut her there so that she couldn't scream.
Sound like you know a little bit more would happen to Corey. How would
I know? Because maybe I would share the same thoughts as this person that did it. I would like to fantasize myself doing it instead of him doing it. But I didn't do it.
He'd like to think about doing it, but it wasn't him. And it sounds a lot like him to me and to investigators. However, they don't have any hard evidence linking him to the crime. They took a DNA sample. Surprisingly, though, Eric's DNA did not match despite his concerning behavior. He needs to get help, and I really hope that he got it. After the scientists ran the DNA from Corey's apartment, they could also be 100% sure that they could rule Tiffany out because the blood evidence that was left behind by the killer had the telltale signs of it being only a man's blood. The Y chromosome was present in the blood. So now they could turn their attention away from Tiffany completely, rule her out, and focus 100% on this crime being committed by a male subject. After a thorough investigation into Tiffany, they realized that she was probably most likely just embellishing the story because she wanted to be important. She wanted attention and just tried to insert herself into the investigation to appear more important than she was. I've actually seen people do this. There had been people who passed away when I was in college, and then there were individuals who hardly knew them that would all of a sudden claim that they knew them so well to just insert themselves into the situation and become popular, which is really sad. Anyway, moving on. DNA didn't match anyone in the state or national criminal database. Even though they could not get a DNA sample from Tiffany because she refused, they were able to eliminate her. And they were pretty much desperate at this point. And as they were asking more questions and getting more tips, they realized that there's someone that they need to check into. Someone that was just mere steps away from Corey's apartment, and it's Ashley's brother, Joe. I talked about him in the beginning. He's the person from the military. He comes and goes periodically. Well, the type of hair he had matched the hair strand that they found on a sock in Corey's apartment. They had not tested it to match to Joe's DNA because he hadn't even been questioned yet, so they needed to bring him in for that purpose. All they had at this point was the hair, so all they could do was a microscopic comparison because they didn't have the test results back yet. First thing they wanted to know was, did he have an alibi for that night? And he doesn't. Now they feel they're really onto something, and even Joe's sister Ashley was scared. She was thinking, could my brother have done this? And she's questioning it because anyone could have done this. Anyone could be a suspect. And Amy was afraid to hang out with anyone. She thought that the killer could be really close, maybe even in their friend group. So it was really hard for them to relax and live their normal lives like they did prior to Corey's death. So back to Joe. This microscopic comparison between his hair and the hair that they found in the sock, it wasn't 100% definitive, but it was enough of a match to at least make police narrow in on Joe. They wanted to know, why was your hair there, or how could one of your hairs get into Corey's apartment? It's pretty obvious that he lives right next door, or he's there a lot. Hair falls out. He could have been close by her apartment, if not in her apartment. There weren't any specific details on that, but he couldn't give them an answer. However, he was willing to give his DNA, so he did. I'm not going to prolong this part. His DNA didn't match, and he was ruled out. There could have been a lot of ways that similar hairs or somebody's hair from next door got into the apartment. Walking on the sidewalk with her socks on or whatnot. But nothing matched Joe's DNA, so he was quickly ruled out. Unfortunately, at this time, weeks are turning into months, and months turn into over a year. Even though the detectives are still working this case, they decide they need to do more, and that's when the family offers a reward for any tips that could lead to capturing this murderer. They had still not gotten any concrete leads, and Corey's case had gone cold. Corey's family goes ahead and they put out that reward for $20,000. There were posters with her face on it all around town to refresh everyone's memory. 6 months later, they get the lead. 18 months after the crime occurred, a group of friends from Jacksonville were hanging out, having a few beers. They were fishing on a dock, just relaxing lakeside, and they started talking about the reward for any info on Corey. And they started talking about the past. One of them, Julie Sedgwick, she had this gut feeling. She remembered and mentioned to them one of their coworkers at the steakhouse where they worked at the time. It was only a few miles from where Corey lived. They said a coworker named Robert Denny had been acting really strange right after Corey's murder. He was distraught. He was crying. He came into work one day and he told his boss that his child had died in a horrific car accident and he needed to go back to Texas. His coworkers, they raised money so that he could purchase a flight back home because they thought that he was leaving to attend his son's funeral. Well, this is not what happened. Robert Denny was only 17 years old when Corey was murdered. He didn't have a son. And the way they found this out is that the owner of the restaurant actually kindly went to hand deliver money to Robert's sister. He had been living with his sister and his sister's husband, but it turns out she says no, he doesn't have a son. That's a lie. But there was a fact that was even more shocking. Guess where Robert's sister lived? In the same complex as Corey Parker. Not only that, their apartment was right across from Corey's. Robert's back balcony was less than 3 feet away from Corey's kitchen, and you probably remember there was a peeping Tom that she was afraid of. And where was he peeping? In the kitchen window. In the room that he slept in, you could look right down into her windows. Robert, he was young, he was a slender guy, and because he didn't look like he would have done something like this, officers interviewed him but then ruled him out. It was just that he was so young. They didn't think he was capable. But Julie walks into the office of the assistant state attorney and she tells him this, and they immediately wanted to know everything about him. Robert was working as a dishwasher at a local steakhouse, and Robert's sister told police that she kicked him out of her apartment because he was weird. She saw him creeping around the apartment complex. One time at 3 o'clock in the morning, he was standing over his own sister, watching her sleep. She also told them that he was addicted to pornography. When they started to interview some of the co-workers, they were told that Robert had been going around talking about this woman next door from his apartment that he would fantasize about. He was obsessed with her. He would be looking over there and could tell if her bedroom light was on or her bathroom light was on. And he would watch her. And for whatever reason, they said that he went into detail about how he would touch himself and get off watching her. This was a problem. But there was a bigger problem. Police want to know why his own sister was so afraid of him, and that's when she drops a bombshell. Something they definitely didn't expect to hear. Robert's older brother, Patrick, was in prison. But it was what he was in prison for that sent chills down the detectives' spines. Patrick Denny committed capital murder for the slaying of Teresa Catherine Latimer. She was stabbed not once, but 97 times. 97 times. And the newspapers all talked about how this woman was stabbed, quote, almost 100 times. That's how they put it, almost 100 times. And this was unreal to detectives. Could two boys from the same family kill a woman the exact same way and stab them that many times? And it turned out that Robert allegedly looked up to his older brother. He was 9 years old when Patrick committed his crime, and Patrick was only 15. He was 15 years old committing capital murder. And I need to stop and talk about this because I found this to be absolutely mind-blowing. Detectives saw the same thing I probably did. The similarities. This made Robert Denny their number one suspect. Their minds were set. They thought he did this. There's no way it could be a coincidence that his own brother committed an almost exactly identical crime back in 1990. Robert's family is from Texas, and that's where Patrick committed the murder back on August 28, 1990. Robert's older brother Patrick was 15, as I mentioned, and he was an Eastwood High School student. He was a paper boy for the El Paso Times newspaper, and he had started this new paper route on May 1st, 1990. He was supposed to stop delivering the papers on that route by July 31st. However, on this route, there was a 27-year-old woman named Teresa who answered her door to retrieve her newspaper one day, and when Patrick saw her, he was just overwhelmed. He thought she was beautiful. She was definitely a lot older than Patrick, so he probably figured he would never have a chance, and she had her boyfriend. But he became obsessed with her. She was beautiful. She was a bookkeeper, and she attended El Paso Community College. She was a sophomore at the time, and she lived with her boyfriend. Over the weeks that Patrick delivered the newspapers, he began to fantasize about having sex with Teresa, and then finally, he devised a plan. He went to her door pretending that he needed to collect a bill that she owed for the newspaper company. However, as soon as she opened that door, he pushed his way into the house wielding a pocket knife. A knife 2 to 3 inches long. And he demanded that she take off her clothes. And she did what he told her to do, but when he tried to force himself on her, she refused to have sex, and she began screaming and fighting, and that's when he stabbed her, in his words, until she stopped making noise. When he was done, he locked the door behind him and ran. Then Patrick devised another plan. About an hour before Teresa's boyfriend found her completely nude body lying in a pool of blood, Patrick called the police and said that he had been robbed at knife point a few blocks away from the murder scene. He told police he suffered a serious cut to his left thumb while fighting the 4 robbers. It turns out he cut his own hand while he was trying to stab Teresa to death 97 times. His blood was found at the scene of that crime, which later linked him to the murder. The medical examiner determined that 63 of the stab wounds were in Teresa's back, and he added that it probably took her 15 to 30 minutes to die. Surprisingly and coincidentally, there was no evidence of forced intercourse. When he was brought in, they charged him with capital murder and decided that he was going to stand trial as an adult rather than a juvenile because at his age, he was not eligible for the death penalty, even though Texas had it. So they were trying to get life in prison without the possibility of parole. And that is what he was sentenced to, except he did have the possibility of parole in 15 years. But despite all that, he is still in prison till this day, thankfully. He was 17 years old when he stood trial, and he showed absolutely no emotion. He was found guilty of capital murder. And friends and relatives of Teresa, they were sobbing in the courtroom. This is Patrick on the left. He sat motionless as the prosecutor was giving a closing argument. Patrick's father, Mike, he stood by his son's side, and he even argued that authorities failed to let Patrick talk to his attorney that Mike had provided to him, and stated that that was his right, and they tried to use this to somehow mitigate his offense. I have you know that Patrick McCoy Denny is 47 years old, and he's still in Alfred prison in Texas. So where does that leave us in the story? Well, it leaves us exactly where police left off, thinking, this is not a coincidence. What are the chances that someone else committed this crime, someone else besides the man that they have their eyes set on, Robert Denny? Who else has a brother that committed the exact same crime? All of these questions started going through my mind when I heard all this. Do the brothers still communicate with one another? Is there some kind of sick fantasy that they both had? Is it nurture or nature or both? I was thinking, does evil just run through someone's blood? Did Patrick even give his little brother advice on how to commit the perfect crime? Because let me tell you something. Robert was going to make it very hard for police to pin this on him. He wasn't stupid. He had knowledge of the law. He had knowledge of avoiding arrest. He had knowledge of DNA and how everything worked at such a young age. And where do you think he got that knowledge from? I suspected it might have been his brother, the person that he allegedly, supposedly looked up to. So what did they do next? Investigators couldn't help but think that this was a story straight out of Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, with Corey being the vulnerable woman and Robert being a man just watching her from the shadows. They want to know where they can find Robert, and his sister tells them he's living in Easton, Maryland. He moved there because he was dating a woman that he met online. She let him have a place to stay. The woman, though, was a 52-year-old married woman, and they started this relationship through email, and eventually he convinced her to let him live with her and her husband. However, she and Robert were carrying on a sexual relationship behind her husband's back. She's 52 years old. This story just had so many weird twists and turns, and it was so convoluted that I couldn't believe what I was hearing next every time. Throughout my research, it was just another thing. So detectives know they need to get to Maryland, but they needed a plan. How are they going to get Robert's DNA? They decide that they're going to make up a story about a fake crime spree. They're going to bring Robert in to be questioned about this fake crime that doesn't exist, and that they believe he's involved in this fight. Thereby, they could gain his trust, wanting to just rule him out. Like, we're just trying to rule you out. Then ask for his DNA and hope that he will willingly give it to him. They strategize with the police department in Maryland, and they bring Robert in for questioning. However, these were detectives from Jacksonville Beach as well, in this little 10 by 10 room, sitting down with this 19-year-old, explaining that there were some fights and attacks in his neighborhood and that they occurred at 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, they said this because they knew ahead of time that he was in bed. So they wanted to make it so that they could easily rule him out, give him information that he could say, oh, well, I don't have to worry about that. And then he'd be more willing to say, I'm not involved. Here's my DNA. Let me go. And at first, they really feel like they're making some headway because he's cooperating. He's talking about where he was that night and what he was doing, that he was asleep, that he had nothing to do with this. They even asked him, can we look at your hands? And he said, absolutely. And he let them look at the back and the front of his hands. And he even said, listen, I'll get buck-ass naked if you want me to. And they're like, there is no need for that. It was when they asked him to provide a saliva sample for DNA testing that things changed. His body language changed. He started to tense up. He was crossing his arms. He was backing away from investigators. And he says no. So what they do is their plan B. They said, you know what? That's okay. It's fine. Let's just continue chatting. No worries. You want a cigarette? He says, yeah. So they give him a cigarette. And we all know, because we've watched true crime a long time, what they're trying to do. They want to give him a cigarette, have him smoke it, and then when he puts it out, puts it down, later they're going to take that cigarette butt and they're going to get his DNA. But Robert is no dummy. No. He doesn't even finish the cigarette. He smokes it about 3/4 of the way down. He puts it out in the ashtray. And then what does he do? He sticks it behind his ear. And they're sitting there thinking, nobody smokes a cigarette and puts it behind their ear like that. So they move on to plan C. They're going to continue talking to him, trying to build rapport, while another investigator brings in a bottle of water. And he's like, Robert, we're all thirsty. Here's your bottle of water, buddy. Hope this is refreshing. But Robert never takes one sip from that bottle of water. So they're scrambling. They're trying to figure out, what do they do next? So they come up with another plan. They say, you know what? All we want you to do is sign a statement. There's just a few forms, formalities. We just want you to sign them for protocol. Then we're just going to let you go. That's it. Just sign the statement that says you are not involved in the crime. So they give him the piece of paper, a pen, and an envelope. He signs the statement, and then they say, okay, go ahead and put it inside that envelope, and then seal it. And when they say seal it, I think you know what they mean. Lick the envelope and seal it with your DNA. And to their surprise, that's when he stops and he stands up and he looks at them. And remember, this is a 19-year-old. Like I said, he knows a lot for being 19. And he says, that's the third time that you have tried to get my DNA. The cigarette, the water bottle, and now this envelope. He throws the envelope at them and he says, you seal it yourself. And then he follows it up with, is there anything else? Well, they couldn't hold him for any reason, so they had to let him go. But they did put surveillance on his home and where he was working at this computer store. He would actually go outside and take a little cigarette break every 45 minutes or so. But he would never leave the cigarette butts behind. He would put them in his pocket. He was clearly doing this so they couldn't collect his DNA for testing. And I asked myself and you, does an innocent person do that? Answer that question, because when you find out what happens next, that question is going to be in your mind. Does an innocent person go through all these lengths so that police cannot collect their DNA? They had been watching him for 48 hours, and on the third day, while they're still watching him, it rained. Well, probably out of habit, something he's done hundreds of times, he goes outside and he spits on the ground. And I'm thinking, wow, after all that, all the effort to hide your saliva, you spit on the ground. Well, the detectives were quick. They came out there right when he went back inside. They take a Q-tip and they get that spit. And because it rained, the spit, and it was kind of gross, was sitting on top of the water. It was easy to collect because it separated from the water, if you know what I mean. And it also helped to reduce the contamination. They finally had his DNA. And it turns out that the unknown DNA from Corey's apartment was Robert Denny's. What was more incriminating, though, up until this point, is that he said he had never stepped foot in her apartment before and he didn't even know this woman. When he was interviewed the first time, he said that, and then later, when they confront him about the saliva on the DNA match that they found, once again, he says, no. Not only that, he had a girlfriend at the time that the murder occurred. And remember that gold lighter that they found? Well, his ex-girlfriend said that she's positive it was Robert's. This is detectives' theory at this point. They believe that Robert had been watching Corey. He knew her schedule. He watched as she got ready to go out that Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, and he was wearing gloves. He entered her kitchen. through the window. He had a knife with him. They think he hid somewhere, probably in her home, possibly in the bedroom closet, and he waited for her to come back. When she was finally asleep in her bed, not expecting anything to happen, that's when Robert went into action. But he didn't anticipate that Corey would fight as hard as she did. That's when she was able to pull out his hair. And the lighter, somehow in the fight, they believe it fell from his pocket. What happened as he stabbed her again and again is what they think happened to his own brother. He cut himself. And when he was leaving through that window, he left a smear on the windowsill. That smear tested positive for his DNA. This put Robert Denny on trial for first-degree murder. Now, I know these cases usually end here after I tell you what happened in court, but there's more to the story that I could not leave out because I found something. I found something that not one of the sites or the shows I watched talked about. I found something that I wasn't even sure was legitimate, but I believe it is. I want to read part of it to you and show it to you and explain it to you because it really did blow my mind. I never like to take sides, so to speak. I would never want my vision to be clouded and give a criminal any benefit of the doubt in these stories, especially with something as heinous as this crime. But I do think about things. There are facts and circumstances that make me think about things. And what I want you to know, after I tell you what happened during the jury deliberation, is that Robert had something to say. But before we go into that, the prosecutor didn't want there to be any question or a story that Robert could make up about how his DNA could have gone into her apartment. You know, he could say something like, oh, well, I was helping her with groceries and then something fell, it was a piece of glass, it cut my finger. They didn't want him to be able to provide answers. They wanted to get him on record actually denying he knew or denying he had ever been in her apartment because that would catch him in a lie. That would mean there's no reason that his DNA should have been there unless he was there to kill her. So they do a little something that's a little sneaky. They have one of the female detectives, because they felt like, he would open up more to her, go back to his house and kind of act like she wasn't really sure what was going on. She's not a detective. She's just someone like a new hire at the police department, just trying to tie up some loose ends on Corey's case. Well, she was wearing a wire, and I have this recording, and it's good. It's so good because you get this feeling like they're going to catch this guy. So I'm going to play that for you.
Do you know Corey Parker or ever talked to her? No? Okay. No. So y'all didn't go back and forth with the apartment? I went to his guy right next to Sutler's. Alright, so y'all didn't go back and forth and all that stuff. Okay.
Now he denies ever being in that apartment, and they've got him. At his trial, he even took the stand. He tried to prove that he was just this little boy next door, that he did not do this. And the prosecutor even called him Mr. I don't know in his closing argument, because that's all he said. Anytime he was questioned about something that didn't make sense, he said, I don't know. When they asked him questions about why his hair would be there or his DNA, I don't know. After a 3-week trial, the jury needed less than an hour to render a guilty verdict. They deliberated for only 45 minutes and found him guilty of murder in the first degree. He was only 17 when he committed this crime, so just like his brother, he wasn't given the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Okay, now here comes a few things I think you'll find interesting like I did. There have been interviews with Robert. He still maintains he is not guilty. And when he was interviewed in prison, he was straight up asked, did you kill Corey Parker? And he said, no, I didn't. He believes that the sins of his brother made the police narrow in on him. And he says that the police came up with this theory, that this was some kind of twisted brotherly bond. And he said, there's no truth to that. He said, even though my brother was convicted of murder, it doesn't make me a murderer. Here's part of that interview. And you hear him say he was only 9 when his brother went away, and he doesn't communicate with him. He wouldn't even recognize him if he walked into the room.
Simply because my brother is convicted of murder does not make me a murderer.
He believes that the lab wasn't following the right protocols, and he believes that they mixed up the samples. The interviewer isn't quite sure, so she's pressing him, and she's saying, okay, so contamination on both the blood and the hair, and he agrees it seems impossible. And he said, I understand why you might feel that way. It's far-fetched.
When I first heard that my spit was what they collected to match to any DNA at the crime scene, it was just unreal. I'm thinking to myself, how could this be? There's definitely evidence that suggests they may have mixed up samples. I've thought about this for years, and it happened. Police do frame people. We see it all the time now in America.
But I'm thinking, could it happen? Because we know that innocent people do go to prison, but there's something else. There were things that his attorneys did, like file an appeal, claiming that there was ineffective assistance of counsel and that the crime scene was mishandled, and that would have changed the outcome of the trial. I don't think it would have. But he wanted to make a point to say that his privacy was breached. If they wanted his DNA, they could have gotten a warrant, a court order, instead of just following him around. There was also apparently some evidence. A woman came forward at the evidentiary hearing, and she said that her husband had confessed to her that he was the one that killed Corey Parker. It's definitely a lot to think about. However, something else here. He created a blog. And this is what surprised me. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'm still thinking about it. I'm still reading it. I've never really heard from someone the way that I was able to read through Robert's own words. Here's his website, and it says, "Welcome to my page. My name is Robert Eric Denny, and I've been wrongfully convicted of murder for the death of Corey Parker." And this post is from Tuesday, June 18th, 2013. He says that since then, my life has been changed into the most unimaginable way. Many people might be mad at me or even hate me. Well, what is really unfair is that the truth will never be revealed. A friend of mine has encouraged me to get my story out since the media and the local government seem to only care about covering up pertinent facts and kicking dirt over my name. There were 2 victims that came out from this mess. Here's his story. He says, please be engaged enough to read it in its entirety before making a judgment or leaving comments. So I'm going to go back and forth because I'm trying to talk from his words and then my words, and it's a little confusing, I have you know. But I did read his story, and it's pretty long, but it's worth the read in my opinion. He said that he's in a Florida prison convicted of murdering a person that he's never met or even knew existed. He said he's 31 years old at the time, and he's been jailed and in prison and other government holding facilities since he was 19, trying to prove his innocence. He explained that Corey Parker was found murdered in her Jacksonville Beach apartment. She lived on the bottom floor of a quadplex apartment building that sat backdoor to backdoor across the courtyard from his upstairs apartment. He said that the buildings were separated by a small yard, a clothesline, and a chain link fence about 30 feet apart. He was 17 years old and working as a cook and dishwasher at a local barbecue restaurant. He had never met Corey Parker, and he was unaware that anyone was living in the unit where she was. In fact, he said, my roommate and I thought that apartment was empty. He says that when her body was discovered, he was surprised to learn that anyone even lived there. Police interviewed every person who lived in the neighborhood several times in the days following her murder, and detectives spoke to him twice. They later admitted that he was not a suspect, and never did he think that he would later be arrested for her murder. He said that despite what they think, the reason he moved back 4 months after Corey died, and it was 4 months apparently after she died, not a day after like the friends said from the steakhouse. These are things I'm gathering from his story. It was because he had a drug and alcohol problem, and being in Florida was contributing to that. So he returned to his home in Texas to have a fresh start. He didn't even keep up with the news, according to him, and he assumed that the police had caught the murderer. He didn't even give it a second thought. Then in early 2000, he cleaned up his life. he moved to Maryland, where he started his new career. He opened up his own business in the computer industry. Meanwhile, back in Florida, the investigators sat idle for nearly 2 years. Detectives couldn't find any enemies that Corey had, even though she seemed very popular and had a lot of people around her, even strangers, every night at work. She even had a coworker named Eric. By the way, I talked about him. And Robert says that on numerous occasions, Eric had asked Corey out on dates and was continuously bothering her to the point of stalking. Eric was interviewed by police, who proceeded to tell them he was supposed to meet with her for Thanksgiving dinner. He then admitted he fantasized about stabbing her to death and forcing himself upon her, but he denied doing so in a hypothetical what if, and he described how he would have murdered Corey if given the chance. It was similar to the actual crime scene, including facts they hadn't made public. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and they just thought he was crazy. So they let him go, and he fled to Norway, and who knows where he is today. I'm reading all this in his words. This is what Robert's saying. Well, Robert then says, in the spring of 2000, the family and friends of Corey wanted to know why police had no suspects. So they bring forth this $20,000 reward. And as Robert puts it, everybody knows money will bring out the worst in people, and he had to find out the hard way. So over 1.5 years after the murder, 2 of his former coworkers found out about the reward and remembered that he had lived in the same neighborhood as Corey. These people were allegedly not his friends, according to him. They were bitter because he would constantly call in sick from work. He would lie about deaths in his family so that he could go out and party because he was on drugs, and he was ashamed that he was lying to his coworkers, but unfortunately being on drugs made him do that. And that's something he regrets. He said that his former colleagues called the police to inform them that he might have something to do with the crime. He says he admits that he lived with his sister and they were not on speaking terms for a while, just because of his lifestyle. She had bad things to say about him to police. When she mentioned that Patrick, his brother, was in prison for a 1990 murder, then the police decided that if his brother was a murderer, then Robert must be one too. Robert says that he hardly knew his brother growing up and that he was too young. He was only 9 years old when his brother was arrested. But police were convinced that because Patrick had done something like this, so had Robert. Now, this was something I found very interesting. And again, I can't really compare this to any other information, but let me tell you about the DNA according to Robert. He said that one wouldn't ordinarily think that it's possible for DNA from a crime scene to match someone who wasn't there, but think again. His spit sample was sent to the FBI crime lab to compare it to a single hair follicle that was found on a pair of Corey's panties that were balled up next to her body. The FBI reported in September 2000 that the root from the hair yielded a partial mixed DNA profile that contained DNA from either 3 or 5 completely different people. The report found that he was a contributor to that mixture, and for years he struggled to understand how this hair could contain any of his DNA, and he still doesn't have any definite answers. He said that his defense attorneys were able to ascertain that the FBI tested and handled the spit sample inappropriately. They had it centimeters away from the hair, and the analysts were wearing dirty gloves. He said the DNA sampling is a very sensitive process, and he believes that the sample was contaminated. Further, when his own attorneys wanted to test the root, it was sent to a private lab, and they were told that the sample was destroyed in the first test. So there was no way for them to verify the FBI's results. I would love for you to read this whole blog. I know it's very long, but he also talks about Angela Corey. She was elected to the head of the state attorney in the 4th Judicial Circuit in Florida in 2008. And that's where she became nationally known for a 2012 decision to charge George Zimmerman with the shooting death of Trayvon Martin. And many of you probably remember that case. Well, Robert says that there were a lot of politics going on, and she was desperate for someone to be found guilty of Corey's murder. Even though there was a lack of evidence, she obtained an arrest warrant, and they somehow figured out a way to, quote, retest his blood samples. Now, I just want to read this last part because I know this is long. 2 days after the murder, crime scene technicians collected 4 samples of what looked like blood from the kitchen window of Corey's apartment. The samples had been exposed to the outside environment and the atmosphere due to the negligence of not securing the windows. 24 police officers had entered the scene when the samples were finally collected. 2 of them, the samples, had been packaged improperly and later turned out they had mold on them. The 2 others were scraped off of a surface with a dirty scalpel. The samples were tested in April 1999, a year before Robert became a suspect at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Laboratory in Jacksonville. One of the samples gave a partial mixed result that matched Corey Parker and excluded Robert, and the 3 other samples yielded no result, meaning there was no DNA present. However, somehow in October 2000, when they retested the samples, one of the specimens that earlier had no results in 1999 all of a sudden generated a complete unmixed DNA profile that matched Robert's DNA perfectly. The sample is known as sample number 19. And he said that ironically, there were no photographs of the sample of blood. And much like the missing hair follicle, there were no photographs of that either. And the entire sample had been destroyed during testing. And the testing was done by a man named Timothy Petrie, who retested these samples. And it turns out that he had a history of destroying samples that matched defendants so that the results could never be confirmed or denied. Also, sample number 19 was tested for 72 days, when most tests only take 3. Robert said that nobody even checked whether he had an alibi because he did, but they were already set on him being the murderer. Since the murder happened on Thanksgiving, he was able to know exactly where he was and who he was with and what he was doing. 11 other people, he said, came forward that could vouch for his whereabouts, including his ex-girlfriend. Then he said that the state was surprised when they learned he had an alibi, so they rushed his arrest and never contemplated the possibility that he could have been innocent. They didn't want to admit their mistake, so they got the medical examiner to testify that Corey's time of death couldn't be determined, that the murder could have taken place before Robert's alibi began. It was also discovered that there were dozens of unidentified fingerprints at the murder scene and 2 semen stains from different men on the bed comforter. These stains had still not been identified, and hundreds of hairs were taken from the scene. Majority never even identified. However, the prosecution tried to develop even more evidence against him with no results, he says. They learned that no carpet fibers from his apartment matched any of the ones on the scene. There were no traces of blood found in his apartment. No murder weapon or bloody clothes were found. No witness saw any scratches or marks or cuts or bruises on him in the days following the murder, which was inconsistent with the brutal nature of this crime and the fact that supposedly the perpetrator cut themselves and left blood. The most damaging to the state was the inability, in his opinion, to establish any link whatsoever between Corey and him. And it just goes on, and he just talks about the manipulation, the coercion of witnesses for them to lie. And I know when you hear this, you're probably going to cringe. But I do like reading these things. It just makes me think. It challenges my mind. It doesn't change what happened, and nothing can bring Corey back. But there is corruption. When it comes to police, when it comes to prosecutors and attorneys, there is definitely human error and corruption in our world and in our legal system. We can't deny that. So it does give me pause to think. One thing I thought was very interesting was on the floor next to the body was that gold Zippo lighter. Remember that? And Robert talks about the fact that it had the acronym NACTA engraved on it. It stands for National Air Traffic Controllers Association. The state interviewed every single person who knew Robert back then, and everyone agreed that was not his lighter, except for his girlfriend, Heather Champion. His fingerprints and DNA were not on the lighter, and the lawyers learned that only 50 of those lighters were ever made, and they were distributed in Washington, D.C., when he was only 13 years old and living in New Mexico. So if it were his lighter, how would he have even gotten in possession of it? He said that he has no connection with air traffic controllers or pilots whatsoever. However, his attorney found out that Corey Parker dated a man who was going to college at an aeronautical school in Daytona where air traffic controllers train. And he couldn't be located. It does make you think. It just makes you think. Robert says that the police coerced and manipulated his girlfriend into lying about things and making connections that weren't really there. They continued to ask her if things belonged to him. And there were like this blue shirt that was hanging from a tree and had hairs on it. It was right outside Corey's apartment. Well, none of those hairs matched the DNA of Corey or his DNA. They were from different people. However, somehow his girlfriend says, even though his friend says it's not, the girlfriend says, yeah, that's definitely his shirt. One interesting thing I read at the end, this is the end, and this got a lot of media attention. The Discovery Channel, A&E, he talks about how like it was even on Court TV, just to name a few. He said that these programs, they each told the story from the perspective of the state and the victim's friends and the family or the detectives on the case. And producers don't ever bother to interview Robert or his attorneys. And everything is just one-sided. In his opinion, it's full of lies and manipulation. He said he's sick and tired of being portrayed as a monster for a hideous murder that he did not commit. He said, I'm tired of being told my DNA was found at a crime scene and that the fact was no one ever hears about how troublesome and questionable the DNA evidence really is. I'm sick of sitting in prison, all of my freedom removed. It has been almost 13 years since my arrest. He said, if you're interested in helping him, even with prayers, you can email him. Now, I'm not going to do that. And I don't expect you to either. But this is just stuff I wanted to point out because I didn't hear anything like this anywhere else. And here are all the posts. There's even one from like 2019. And I love researching. I like going deep. I wanted to read his whole blog. I will be reading it. I have been reading it. I will link it in the description box if you are interested in reading through it. Maybe not. But we don't often get the chance to hear from the person who has been found guilty of a crime and to hear their point of view. I just want to thank all of you once again for watching this video. I care very deeply about every single person who has lost their lives to the monsters that walk among us. And I'm here to tell their stories. And you're here to listen, and that means so much to me. So thank you so very much for watching another one of my videos. I will see you in my next one. Bye.